Today, I want to start off by saying thank you for all of your support, not just during last week, but throughout the years. I feel very lucky to have you guys, people that watch my stuff and are supportive of what I do. It means a lot, so thank you. One of the things I've learned is that I have a tendency to think too much about the future instead of focusing on what's right in front of me. So I just want to make sure that I let you guys know that I appreciate you watching this now. I'm grateful to have you here now. But then also, much like Luffy in this chapter, you come to the realization that once you hit rock bottom, there's only one way to go.
What more could I lose?
Last night's anime episode was really good. There was an up in the production value for sure. They showed Jinbei using Rio, which I thought was fascinating. It's like the anime keeps confirming Haki upgrades for Jinbei. We got Yamato versus Ace, which I thought was pretty well done. The only thing I'm a little bit confused about is I don't know if Yamato was able to use Advanced Conqueror's Haki back then. I mean, the anime kind of makes it seem that way, but if that's the case, then I'm questioning, like, how is Ace even able to keep up with that? I like the character moments too. I thought they were pretty nice. Specifically, I like a moment where Ace is pretty intuitive, and based off a statement from Yamato, Ace actually says, "Oh, so you actually do love your father." I thought that was cool, because I do suspect that deep down Yamato still does love Kaido. Alright, so we get Oden in the middle of transferring the Book of Vindsmoke to Whole Cake Island via a mirror that belongs to Brûlé, so he's gonna go into the mirror world, and I'm just guessing that we're gonna get to see Katakuri very soon. Because with Big Mom away from her territory, I think Katakuri should be the one in charge right now. And Pudding definitely seems like she still has a role to play in this, judging from her expression. The actual chapter starts off with hybrid form Drake versus the CP0 guy, and I have to say that I'm pretty impressed as to how fast this guy was able to get to the rooftop. So I'm guessing he used Soru to be able to get there as fast as he did. It's still a pretty good speed feat, because the chapter starts and he's at the basement level. So he's getting stabbed on the back, and then Drake says, "This is my justice," or whatever, and then the guy has a pretty interesting line which says, "I envy you." I'm curious about what that means. Does he mean he envies Drake's freedom? Because maybe like Cypherpole are just kind of like puppets of the government? So the guy uses Soru to free himself from the blade, and then he counters Drake with a Shigan, and we don't get to see exactly what happens to Drake, but I'm pretty sure that he's going to probably chase this guy up to the rooftop, because I feel like Drake knows that he has a debt to repay to Luffy. Plus, he's already shown that he's been able to get up once before. Quick jump to the capital, and we see that people are readying the lanterns to send them up to the sky. Kind of curious what Toko's wish would be. I'm guessing that it would be her wanting to see Yasui again. But then also I'm connecting this part of the Fire Festival to what Ace tells Yamato in the episode, where he pretty much promises Yamato that he'll be back again, in one way or another. So it could be symbolic. We go to the rooftop to see that Kaido's still busy getting hit by Luffy's Hydra. He's getting all these different hits from different directions. At one point he tries to block one of them with his Kanabo, but just as he manages to block one, he gets hit with a triple combo. So that's just the nature of Snake Man speed. It's interesting that Kaido says that this isn't something that rubber should be able to do, because it's almost as if it's moving in accordance with Luffy's will, right? And so I feel like this could be foreshadowing the Gomu Gomu no Mi awakening, in the sense that, like, as I've said before, I feel like a previous user of the Gomu Gomu no Mi used the awakening of the fruit in Long Ring Longland, and that's why all the animals and the trees are all stretched out. And again, the explanation that we got back then for why the animals grow so long is because they are able to live freely without any restraints, either mentally or physically. Kind of like Luffy's python, right? Or Luffy's arms in Snake Man. And just for clarification purposes, in the official translation, Kaido actually says, is he bending the trajectory of his attacks? Given the nature of rubber, that should be impossible. So it's kind of like hinting at, okay, what is the real name of the Gomu Gomu no Mi? Is it maybe the bend fruit? Because the way that I interpreted that line is Kaido saying, okay, this guy is bending stuff that he shouldn't be able to bend. So he's bending the trajectory of something, and that goes beyond the power of being a rubber human. It turns out that Kaido is still drunk, and so he goes into another phase. And the official translation actually kind of served to clarify a little bit more what this phase was, because at first when I read the early translations, I was a little bit confused about what it was. I think the early translations called it like the flirty phase, or like flirting Kaido, but the official calls it drunken beggar, which kind of makes sense because he's begging Luffy to stop hitting him. So the point of the phase is to sort of evoke some pity from the opponent. But it is true that there's still that sort of flirtatious undertone. I feel like a lot of us have been in scenarios where there's alcohol involved, and then some people start getting flirty, and then after they sober up, they kind of say, well, that was just the alcohol speaking, I had one too many drinks, and so they kind of justify that behavior. But in the back of my mind, when people say that, when people try to justify themselves with that, I'm always thinking, like, was it just the alcohol, or is there really something there, deep down, and because the alcohol removed those inhibitions, then you just kind of went for it. So ultimately, it comes down to thinking about, okay, how much does alcohol actually influence human attraction? I mean, people do stupid things when they're drunk, but I don't believe like it would change your core. I'll just give you one example, right? So before the pandemic, I went to this party with a group of friends. And by the time I got there, one of the girls who was kind of part of our group, who was married, was already pretty drunk. And she was acting flirty. And then fast forward a couple of months later, her and her husband divorced. So this chapter pretty much shows us Kaido using future sight to be able to dodge Luffy's attacks. And I think that, narratively speaking, if you look at the order of these opponents, if Kaido can use future sight, it makes perfect sense for the admirals, who are going to be, opponents in the future, to have future sight as well. And we've already seen hints of this. The way that Aokiji and Kizaru dodged attacks in Marineford is very similar to the way that Katakuri used future sight to dodge attacks as well. So if Kaido's showing future sight before we even get to the final war, pretty sure that the admirals will have it as well, because you want to be able to have like fearsome opponents in the future of the story. Otherwise, it's just too easy. Now, what's fascinating too is that in addition to using future sight, Kaido also moves the same way that Luffy's arms move, because his dragon form pretty much moves like a snake anyway, so he's kind of mimicking the movements of Snake Man. So he's able to bypass Luffy's speed with his own, which is incredible, and then he just bites down on him. So he spirals upward, carrying Luffy in his mouth, and the purpose of this is to get Luffy in point-blank range of his Boro breath. So he shoots it down at him, and we get some pretty cool panels of both Yamato and Momonosuke avoiding the beam. The whole scene is pretty reminiscent of Kid using his electromagnetic cannon to push Big Mom down. Now, in order to stop himself from falling, Luffy actually has to switch out of Snake Man and go into Bound Man, because not only is the form bulkier, but it also allows him to boost himself through the air with a lot more intensity. So he flies back up to Kaido, but he's a lot more aware now that the Gear 4 time limit is ticking, so he has to finish this as fast as possible. Kaido tries to eat/bite down on Luffy again, only Luffy's actually able to dodge this time, and he prepares a Gomu Gomu no over Kong gun. That's what the official translation calls it. Although, if I'm not mistaken, the actual Japanese has a word in it that sort of means like conquers Haki. So it's kind of like saying like conquers Haki Kong gun in a way, because that's what he's using, right? He's using advanced conquerors Haki to coat the attack. So technically speaking, this should be Luffy's strongest Gear 4th attack. Now, before Luffy lands the attack on Kaido, Kaido kind of gets a little bit into the lore of Wano, saying that Luffy is free to side with whoever he wants, but if he chooses to side with the people of Wano, he's essentially siding with people who are weak because they want peace and they're pacifists. So again, it goes back to what Oden said about how the borders of Wano were initially closed to keep the country safe, to keep the peace within the country and protect itself from an enormous threat. And so again, I'm assuming that the threat was actually the force that eventually became the world government. And so that Wano wanted to protect itself from the world government, which is interesting because Kaido was kind of disappointed in that decision. If it were up to Kaido, Kaido would have, fought against the world government. And it's very interesting because, look at how the chapter ends, right? With the world government interfering and actually giving Kaido an opportunity to fight a government agent. Luffy's over Kong gun does a significant amount of damage to Kaido, but it's still not enough, so he still has to follow through. But Kaido goes into hybrid form immediately, encounters with a stronger version, I believe it's a stronger version of Thunder Bagua. And so just from a visual standpoint, there are two panels in this chapter that seem to echo Luffy's past defeats. The first one is this one. Luffy getting hit with the Thunder Bellow Bagua reminds me of the first time Luffy got defeated by Kaido. So he gets hit with the attack, and we can definitely see that Luffy has grown a lot, because normally this would be an attack that would essentially KO him, but in this case he still remains conscious and actually covers his mouth to stop the Gear 4th air from escaping so that he can remain in Gear 4th. And then Luffy says, I have to land this hit, otherwise I'm going to lose. And so of course we see that the chapter ends with Luffy not being able to land the attack, but my question is, had he landed his attack on Kaido, would Kaido have gone down? Because honestly, I don't think so. I think Kaido still looks like he has a significant amount of stamina left. I mean, I know it's a pretty powerful attack that Luffy is about to do. I just don't think that would have been enough to take down Kaido, because Kaido hasn't even shown awakening yet. So even without the interference of the CP0 guy, I'm still doubtful, because he comes in there with Tekai, Iron Body, and he kind of pulls Luffy's arm back so that he's not the first to land the hit. So that throws Luffy off, and it's enough for Kaido to land the final hit of the chapter on him. And actually, now that I think about it, it seemed like Luffy's attack, his Conqueror's Haki Kangun, was being aimed at Kaido's scar. So if he had actually connected that hit, it might have been a much more devastating blow than I originally thought. I also think it's interesting that if we look at the final panel of Luffy in this chapter, there's no denying that he looks pretty messed up, but technically speaking, he's still not out of Gear 4th yet. Now, I don't know if he's going to be able to keep the mode here, but I do think that this is going to trigger his awakening. I loved the ending of this chapter, because not only is it beautifully drawn, but it also sets up a major character moment for Kaido in the next chapter. Just one look at his eyes, and you can just tell how conflicted he is about landing that hit on Luffy. I've never seen him look this way before. Now, the thing about Kaido as a character is that deep down, I've heard enough from him to know that he deep down feels like he's a failure, for whatever reason. Some time ago, Kaido failed at something. I don't know what it was, but he failed. Just like we all fail at some point. And he hasn't been able to let it go. Because Kaido is special, right? He's the strongest creature. When Whitebeard was alive, he was considered the strongest man. Now that he's passed away, Kaido is the strongest pirate. So he's pretty special. And so I think that deep down, he wants somebody to show up to make him see that he can let go of that failure. Kaido's looking for some closure. The problem is that because Kaido is so special, he's not just going to let anyone teach him that lesson. He needs somebody who's either just as special as he is, or somebody who's even more special than he is. And so of course it boils down to Kaido beginning to think that maybe that person could be Luffy. In chapter 1037, after he gets drunk, Kaido tells Luffy, "This is a sign that I've accepted you. It's been so long since I've been able to fight someone who could really go toe-to-toe with me." But then he gets disappointed again in this chapter because history repeats itself, and so Kaido doesn't think that it's fair for him to take out Luffy this way, which echoes the way that he took out Oden. Now, an important reminder here is that Kaido actually ended up killing the old lady, Higurashi, for interfering in his fight against Oden. So maybe next week, Kaido is going to try to kill this CP0 agent, and then maybe Luffy's going to interfere by telling Kaido the same thing that he told Katakuri, about how there's no such thing as a fair fight in a fight between pirates. Then again, I've also read people saying that if this is like a Katakuri situation, then maybe Kaido will actually inflict some damage to himself on purpose, to make things a little bit more even. It kind of goes back to a conversation that I remember Rayleigh having with Luffy about how, like, Rayleigh was asking Luffy, like, what are you going to do when you meet all these powerful pirates that have powers that you can't even imagine right now? And then Luffy says, well, I guess it depends on what kind of person they are. And so this brings forth a point that I think is pretty easy to dismiss when it comes to talking about combat, which is that personality matters. The personality of the people fighting matters in combat. And we've seen examples of this primarily through Usopp fights where, like, for example, Perona's negative hollow doesn't affect him because he's already negative, right? Or how he's able to defeat Sugar because Sugar is afraid of his face. Again, Katakuri is a pretty good example of this as well, and so I think it's pretty obvious that Kaido's personality is going to play a pretty big role in defining how the fight moves forward from here. I also think it's not a coincidence that it's like a government agent who's interfering here, because ultimately, like, the final battle, the final fight of this series is going to be pirates versus the government. And so both Luffy and Kaido are pirates. And you got that CP0 agent who's a government agent. So I feel like this is going to force Kaido to pick a side. And I think we're going to see a lot more than that moving towards the final arc, where we're going to see some pirates that don't really like Luffy, but that ultimately are going to end up joining forces with Luffy because they would rather join Luffy than bow down to the government. So in a way, it's kind of funny that due to the government's anxiety and them trying to influence the outcome of this fight, trying to manipulate the outcome of this fight, is actually going to give them the opposite result of what they would have wanted. It's kind of like that quote from Kung Fu Panda about how one often meets his destiny on the road he takes to avoid it. And so it kind of goes back to what Mihawk said about Luffy in Marineford, about how Luffy's greatest strength, his greatest power, is not his double fruit, it's not his haki, it's the ability that he has to make allies out of everyone he meets. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, do you guys think that by the end of the series, like, Luffy's actually gonna befriend Akainu and Imu? Do you think that's a possibility, or is that way too much? I feel it would be a little bit too much, honestly. But then shonen tropes being what they are, you kind of never know until it actually happens. And I mean, at the very least, we could definitely say that Kaido's level of respect for Luffy is definitely going to go up after this chapter. That being said, I really do appreciate the fact that Oda has been handling the Luffy versus Kaido fight like this. And by this I mean with ups and downs, right? waves. You got your peaks, you got your high points, and your low points, which is essentially life, right? You got ups and downs. So I like the fact that this is the way that Oda has been handling this confrontation, this fight, ever since the arc started, really. I appreciate that. It just makes the fight that much more credible. And so because of the struggle, it's definitely going to make Luffy's victory by the end have a lot more merit and feel a lot fuller and sufficient by the end. And so I talked about how there's 2 visual references in this chapter to Luffy's past defeats. The first one being the one-shot with the Thunder Bagua. But then I feel like this final page, this final spread of the chapter, is sort of a reference, sort of an echo to when he got defeated by Ragnarok. So it's kind of like Oda saying, like, you know, remember Luffy's past defeats. Remember his L's. In fact, Luffy actually gets eaten in this chapter, which, you know, reminds me of another L that he took. And I remember Zoro had to save him back then. So again, it does this. Up and down, up and down. And every time, like, he hits a low point, it always goes up from there. And again, that's not just Luffy. That's life, just in general, for everyone. And I've mentioned this before in other videos, but sometimes, like, there are certain chapters that you read, like, you know, during a week, where the chapter actually means more to you because it relates to the situation that you're in. And so this was definitely one of those chapters for me, because I definitely felt like it was my final Gear 4th, you know? Like, I have nothing left, and then all of a sudden you have a guy hold your arm back and you get pummeled into the ground. But then also deep down you know that it's not going to stay that way forever. So, you know, I can't wait to see what happens next. This is a very interesting low point. It's kind of like life imitating art in a way. So now I'm actually really, like, almost like personally invested in what happens next. I want to see what this blossoms into. I mean, this has obviously been the hardest fight that Luffy has had post time skip. But now I'm also invested in a personal level as well. Like, it just kind of happened to coincide. So yeah. Can't wait to see what happens next. Thank you guys so much for watching and for all of your support, not just recently, but throughout the years. Take care. I hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.